So in terms of political reform, obviously we have Supervisor who's been there a number of years. There's been calls for term limits, but no real action on that.
Right.
Same with ranked choice voting, so we don't have 2 rounds of voting but 1. Same with campaign contribution caps. Obviously you're choosing to obey a campaign contribution cap that isn't being enforced on any other candidate. What's your stance on the political reforms you'd like to see happen for Humboldt County elections?
Well, I think term limits are great in local offices. They haven't worked out as well as people had hoped, maybe at the state level. But locally it's great because it guarantees some rotation, it guarantees new blood, it guarantees a new segment of the community is going to get an opportunity to spend some time in city hall or in county government. So I'm a big fan of term limits. As far as campaign finance reform is concerned, we will have a campaign contribution limit for Eureka City races before the next election cycle. We're working on it right now, and I feel confident we're going to get something adopted before the next cycle comes so that we'll have an opportunity to test how well campaign contribution limits work. I have adopted a campaign contribution limit for myself. I always run a door by door, living room by living room, grassroots campaign. I try to run it more on creativity and less on money, and it's been very successful for me in the past. I've won 2 different elections where I was considerably outfunded. One time I beat an opponent that had 7 times the money I had, and another time twice as much money as I had. So again, I think that's a choice as voters we can make. I think that's a choice we can make as candidates to have less expensive grassroots local campaigns. There's no reason we need to give in to this big money push to have campaigns that are on the TV and on billboards and hundreds of thousands of signs all over the community.
So would you say you consider yourself the underdog in this race? Do the mathematics make it difficult to advance to what's probably going to end up being a runoff?
I think if you're going to pull a race and try and predict the winner, that's like trying to predict the weather on June 8th. All I can tell you is the feedback that I get, and the feedback I get is positive. I think given this economy, people are upset that this huge financial war is about to take place for this office. People are upset that that these 2 candidates are going to spend over $100,000 apiece to get elected when they're having trouble making ends meet. They're having trouble finding a job. The 2 just don't match up. We're gonna end up cutting probably $150,000 out of the zoo budget this year at the city of Eureka. And here you have a campaign that's $100,000. It just doesn't make sense. And they should donate that money to the zoo before they spend it on a campaign, in my opinion. So I think that's getting traction. I'm also the only person in the race talking about putting Eureka on the board. We've got some real problems in Eureka. We've made a lot of progress over the last 8 years at addressing those problems and improving the quality of life in our community. But I think now is the time to take the next step. We really need a voice in county government to be a partner with the city of Eureka and focus on getting some of these problems in our community solved.
Now, one thing the county has, I guess, a great deal of responsibility with is dealing with folks living in poverty and more specifically the homeless population. Some blame the county for being too generous, others say not generous enough. Where do you come down? How best can our community solve the issues of extreme poverty and homeless folks we see on the streets?
Well, and I think you asked the 2 big questions. Are we spending too much? Are we giving too much? Are we not spending enough? Or are we not giving enough? I know we have a huge budget. I know we have a ton of people working on it have county jobs in that department. But yet we've got a bunch of people camping and who apparently can't get any services at all. So there's a whole bunch of different questions there that I think really need to be answered. And I've experienced with a number of community groups who've tried to go out and get those questions answered. So if we need more roofs for people so they can have a place to sleep, well, how many more roofs do we need? And they haven't been able to get those questions answered. So to me, I think the important thing is the questions are there. That's really, again, when I talk about that next step for the city of Eureka, answering those questions is the next step. If we need to create more housing, if there's different kinds of housing that we need to have in our community that we don't currently have, then let's figure that out as an answer and then get busy getting it done. But the current situation to me is unacceptable. We've got people camping in our green belts all over the city. It's a real environmental problem. It's a trash problem, and it's not helping anyone become a better member of the community when they have to spend a couple weeks living behind the Bayshore Mall. That's certainly not helping anyone's lifestyle. So we have got to get our arms around that issue. We've got to solve that. We've got to answer those questions and get something done in that regard. Now, other communities have been successful. Tacoma was in the same situation we were in 10 years ago. They put together a very comprehensive plan, got all the stakeholders together, everyone focused on the same program, everyone knew what puzzle piece they played, how they fit into the bigger picture, and they eliminated a large majority of these problems for their community. And everyone was happy with the services that were being provided, and everyone was happy that they didn't have the huge camping problems that we seem to have in our community. So again, I think we can move forward on that. I think we can move forward as a community. I think we can have some agreement between these two sides and these two different views about how those services should be provided.
And
I think.
lastly, transportation. Where do you stand on the county's public transit system? Is it adequate? What more would you do, or is enough being done? Does more need to be focused on road repair?
Well, of course, public transportation is going to lead you back to funding. The reality is the Humboldt Transit Authority buses that go between the different cities, it costs about $4.25, $4.50 per passenger to run those buses. But individual passengers are paying $1.25. So what ends up happening is you have additional funding that comes from government to make those programs work. The more buses you have, the more funding you've got to have from government to make that program happen. Right now we're at the max level of what we can provide given the current revenue streams. So unless you're going to move everyone's ticket price up to $5 a shot, it's going to be very hard to do additional bus routes. I think in the end what you do with public transportation is, again, try to bring the community into the room and make sure that the system we do have meets the most needs that it can possibly meet.
Anything else you'd like to add for the folks at home?
Anything else for folks at home? Well, when I get elected supervisor, I think there's some other important projects in the city of Eureka that I'd like to address. When I was first elected, I was on the Eureka Trails Committee. We put together the waterfront trail plan. It goes all the way from Myrtle Avenue down to Herrick, and a number of portions of that plan have been put in place. I got a large donation, about $250,000 from PG&E to do the section from Truesdale to Hillficker there behind Ray's. So we're going to see that project come forward here soon. But in the next 4 or 5 years, I would very much like to see that entire trail finished. I think it would be a great facility for our community. I think it would be a great place to bike and to run. And it would help with folks who are trying to get to and from work without using a car. Provide a much more direct route to downtown for a lot of different people. So I think there's a number of projects, trails-oriented projects in Eureka I'd like to address. I worked on the trails at Cooper Gulch. There's a lot of those little feeder trails that could be improved so that they serve the public a lot better. I think we already talked about some of the local government, the county government reform projects that I'd like to take on. So again, I hope people will vote for me on June 8th. And of course, the top 2 finishers are going to go forward from there into November. And I hope people, again, will think about what kind of a candidate do they really want. Do we need that big money candidate? Or can we still say that this is Humboldt County, our communities aren't that big, we're local enough that people can run door-to-door campaigns and be successful.
Well, thank you, Jeff, for coming down to Has-Beens and speaking with us today.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm happy to see Access Humboldt being used. It's community TV at its finest, and let's go.